Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Octo-finals of 2018 World Schools Debating Tournament. Please turn off your mobile phones. Thank you. Motion for this round reads, this calls for a world with no belief in the afterlife. Debating this round are Team USA, who are proposing, as well as Team South Africa, who are opposing. Please welcome. Round are Varshini from India, Theodore from Greece, Julio from Mexico, Piper from New Zealand, and Cameron from Scotland. Please welcome. Each speaker has 8 minutes to deliver their speech. The end of the speech will be marked by a double knock. The first and the 7th minute are protected from points of information and will be marked by one knock. The first or the second speaker of each side will deliver a 4-minute reply speech for their side. There are no points of information during these speeches. And now invite the first speaker from the side of opposition.
All around the world, members of the LGBTQ community are told that their very identities are so toxic and disgusting that they deserve to burn in hell for eternity. From the Middle Ages and even today, the world's oppressed are told that their oppression is fine because at least they have the afterlife to look forward to. During the Iranian Revolution, children walked into crowded markets with golden keys around their neck, told that when the bombs on their backs exploded, those keys would unlock an afterlife of eternal happiness. We believe that a world where the belief in the afterlife exists is a world filled with coercion we are so proud to oppose. Before I introduce our first two arguments in today's round, with my partner Emily introducing our third, I'd like to clarify some things in this debate. First of all, what exactly does the afterlife look like? We think it is usually some kind of eternal life or reward after an individual's death in this world that serves as a reward or punishment that for the ideology, for following or not the ideologies that most faiths put forward. This is heaven and hell in Christianity and equivalents in Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and dozens of other religions across the world. What do we think that this debate is about? It is not a debate about whether the afterlife exists, and it is not a debate about whether religion should exist. We can still support the existence of religion, founding the beliefs of certain individuals, and putting forward certain ideologies. We just believe that individuals should believe that the life that they are living is the only one that exists and not believe in an afterlife. With that, let's introduce our first substantive argument that the belief in the afterlife is fundamentally coercive. Before I introduce the two ideas under this, let's just first establish that when it comes to intuitive positive values, things like treating others with respect, not committing murder or theft, there are other ways to positively incentivize individuals not to engage in those actions. And we don't think that people who don't believe in the afterlife are any more morally corrupt or less likely to engage in positive behaviors than those who do believe in the afterlife. There are plenty of non-religious individuals who dedicate their life to charity work and things like this. We think the unique impact of the afterlife as a super powerful incentive to get people to do things applies uniquely to getting them to do things or believe things that they otherwise would not because they would have an aversion to those sorts of practices. That leads to first, them actively doing things that they otherwise wouldn't. Let's just establish that the afterlife is an incredibly powerful incentive. It is both eternal, meaning that there is no escape from it, and it is incredibly polar, meaning that if you are judged as a good individual, you're blessed with a lifetime of eternal and usually universal happiness. But if you are deemed a bad person and do not follow the tenets of your faith, you're punished with literally what can be an eternity of hellfire in some religions. It is an incredibly powerful incentive. It is entirely within the religious infrastructure's incentive to get people to do things they otherwise wouldn't, to operate in that religion's interest, often against those individuals' own interests. It's an incentive to get people to do things like tithe and give money to the church. People in various forms of Christianity have historically been told that if you give 10% of your income to the church, you will be rewarded in the afterlife. We think this is incredibly coercive. particularly for peasants who are literally struggling to put food on the table for their families, to be told that if they give up 10% of their income, then they will be rewarded with eternal happiness. This looks like also religions telling people that they can literally buy places in heaven. We think this is fundamentally coercive and incredibly damaging. But it also gives religions the incentive to say, beat back enemies of their own religion by literally sometimes driving people to engage in conflict. This happened during the Crusades, when thousands of people flocked to the Middle East to kill Muslim infidels because they were told that if they did this, they would be rewarded with eternal happiness. That if they died in this conflict, gave up their life, and took those of others, they would be rewarded with eternal happiness. It looks like extremist groups talking about martyrdom, saying that if you do this thing, if you kill this individual with a faith that goes against your own, you will be rewarded as a martyr in the afterlife. We think this has been responsible for a lot of the conflict and extremist ideology because of this incredibly powerful incentive. But our second idea under this argument is that this punishes certain identities that faiths don't believe with. In addition to coercing people into certain actions, often it also coerces people into buying into often archaic images of identity. Because many religions were formed thousands of years ago, the idea, for example, that LGBTQ individuals are incredibly corrupt, or that women have a holy obligation to be good wives and mothers, is reinforced with the idea of the afterlife. People who don't conform to these ideologies are harmed in two ways. First, everyone around them internalizes the idea that their very identity is so toxic that it deserves to be punished with eternal damnation or hellfire, that it is really, really bad, which leads to things like stymieing progress at the point where these views and identities are seen as so terrible and leads to all sorts of discrimination. But it leads to harms for these individuals themselves when they themselves internalize these beliefs, and leads to things like members of the LGBTQ community subjecting themselves or being willing to be subjected to things like conversion therapy that can often be incredibly painful and absolutely awful. This emotional toll is not something we support. Before we introduce our second argument, go.
Religions also tell people that they can be rewarded and punished in life. And if you're still saying that religion exists, none of your harms are inherent to the afterlife.
We think that there is something uniquely powerful about an eternal afterlife that is completely irreversible and often unilaterally powerful. We think that the argument that you can be sort of cosmically punished in life is maybe something we wouldn't support either, but we also think that there's something about the afterlife as something eternal that is uniquely powerful. With that, let's introduce our second argument about how this stifles change. The idea of an eternal afterlife is incredibly powerful, and oftentimes it leads individuals to focus on the afterlife over things like their own life. What does this look like? It looks like people being told, if you're poor, you're starving, you're being oppressed, don't worry, follow your religion, and there's an eternity of happiness waiting for you. We think that this leads to a couple of things. First, people are less likely to fight against power structures or try to overcome difficulties in their own life for that life, but also those in power use the knowledge that the afterlife is incredibly powerful, essentially to suppress their people. There's a reason that the term religion is the opiate of the masses is so particularly powerful, and we think that the role of the afterlife plays a super big part of this. This, we think, is especially true when religious infrastructures are directly tied to political structures as well. This looks like the Catholic Church having direct ties to some of the rulers of old, and even religious theocracies who are then able to weaponize the afterlife to suppress the will of their people. Essentially, this leads to a sort of complacency, where because people are told that the afterlife is the most important thing that you should be shooting for, you don't necessarily need to achieve change in your own life. And this leads to the oppression of the most vulnerable in society, those who would benefit most from a change in power, a power structure that is uniquely using religion as a tool to generate complacency and to force people to accept their own oppression. Because there is rhetoric that if you just follow the tenets of your faith and don't beat back for change, then that is fine because you will be rewarded with an eternity of happiness. We believe that individuals can be incentivized to do good things for society in other ways. We think that the afterlife is a uniquely powerful and damaging tool to coerce people into doing things that they wouldn't, and not to fight for change because they're willing to accept suffering in their own life to achieve benefits in the afterlife we are so proud to propose.
8 minutes and 6 seconds.
I would like to thank the first speaker of the proposition for their speech and would like to invite the first speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
2 years ago, I lost my grandfather. It was a debilitating experience and it was a scary experience, but I got better. I got better because I had a belief in the fact that I'll be able to see him afterwards, that there was a meaning to the set of arbitrary experiences that could consolidate all of them into one unifying value. Ladies and gentlemen, we will tell you that their side ignores the unique value that the conception of the afterlife can have. In addition, they tried to make this debate about the very thing they said this debate wasn't about, which is religion. It's about individual conception and interrogation of the concept of the afterlife and what that does to people. They're losing on both of those grounds. What am I going to be proving to you in my speech? I'm going to prove to you in my speech, firstly, why we prefer this world because there's unique benefit to individuals in engaging with the concept and meaning of life, and secondly, in my second speech, why there's societal benefits in terms of how we generate morality structures. But before I do that, let's do some important issues of rebuttal. The first thing we need to recontextualize is what exactly the conception of the afterlife is. They give very few examples here. It's not just Christianity and Islam, it's a variety of other conceptions of what this looks like. In African traditional beliefs, the afterlife is a neutral place in which you engage with your elders after you pass away. In many religions, it's a place that has no objective good or reward for the things that you have done, and life is a place in which you can conceptualize what exactly you believe that afterlife is. In addition, religions are becoming increasingly progressive in allowing people to decide what that afterlife is for themselves. In addition, what does this importantly prove for their case, and why does their case fall away? Because it proves there's an opt-out. It proves there's an opt-out of the coercive structures and beliefs that you would like to believe is so harmful to people. That there are various conceptions of the afterlife that people can opt into, and if your world only works in specific instances of what that afterlife is, you don't have a case. So let's move on to the arguments that they give us in this debate. The first thing that they tell us is that the belief in the afterlife is coercive, it is an incredibly rewarding experience, and therefore it's illegitimate for people to believe in. Firstly, we contest that premise. We contest the premise that say that just because it is coercive and that it gives you a reward, it is an inherently illegitimate thing. We say it's perfectly okay for people to be incentivized to act in a certain way because they want certain benefits in the future. We already allow them to do this in status quo. You can see that the benefits are uncertain. We don't know if there is an afterlife or not. Why can't we give the benefit of the doubt to individuals and allow them to make that choice for themselves? Two, we would tell you that this is not a debate about organized religion and its moral practices. This is not a debate about the church charging fees to walk through the Sistine Chapel. The Pope has become increasingly liberal in allowing people in stopping these harmful things. Right? He said that we need to stop telling people that they can pay for entrance into heaven. This is not a debate about organized religion and the malpractice in terms of how that has affected people. This is about their belief in the afterlife. The second thing that they tell us is there are other ways to incentivize good behavior and good moral behavior in people. We would respond to that, right? Perhaps that's true, but that's not a majority of cases. The majority of cases, this is a very powerful incentive for people to act in a certain good way for the benefit of society. We're talking here about prisoners being used, about prisoners being taught about Christianity as a means of rehabilitation, and in fact, incredibly effective means of rehabilitation. Thirdly, the argument was about martyrdom. They say that certain people are going to be seen as martyrs if they sacrifice them for their religion, and this is something that's incredibly harmful. Firstly, we would say it's a minority of instances. They would like to cherry pick a context that is beneficial to them. Even if that wasn't the case, comparatively we are better because we have so much more benefit in terms of how we incentivize people to act morally. That reveals to a more significant proportion to the percentage of the population. Secondly, we would say this is not an idea that is unique to the conception of the afterlife. Martyrdom, what martyrdom is it says that if you act in a certain way, people will also remember you in a certain way. It isn't just about you accessing benefits in a certain life. It's also about how you are viewed and glorified after you leave that life. I think that their harm isn't exactly unique. The next thing that they tell us about is about minorities to the LGBTQ community and women. Firstly, we concede You can see from your first speech that this is not a debate about religion, organized religion, and its misapplication. Secondly, we already told you that there is an opt-out. Thirdly, why is it so bad for LGBTQ communities to decide that they want to be religious and want to opt into this idea of the afterlife? If anything, we would say that LGBTQ individuals can legitimately decide to opt into this idea of a heaven and hell. And they can do so legitimately because all the church says that you can't have sexual intercourse if you are an LGBTQ community, but an LGBTQ person, because that will cause you to hell. You may as well marry a gay person. You may as well participate in church activities. Why is it illegitimate? Why is it an illegitimate way for people to access meaning in life? Before I continue proving to you why, moving also onto our substantive case, proving to you why exactly this is valuable, yes.
Are you basically saying that LGBTQ individuals who are being oppressed by their own faith that they fundamentally believe in, the solution to that is just for them to decide not to be Christian?
Yes, ma'am. So firstly, we think the idea isn't inherent to the conception of the afterlife. That's how organized religion and those structures play out. But secondly, it's very possible for these individuals to live and live a meaningful life with that conception of the afterlife. That's what I spent the last minute doing. But let's move on to the actual substantive case that we bring to you as an opposition side. Firstly, let's introduce a framework for this debate as to what exactly we believe a better world is. It's not just about what they like to talk about. Firstly, it's about individuals and how they can access meaning in life. Secondly, it's about society and which side is best for society. My second speaker will be dealing with that. Why do we think that individuals are especially important in this debate? Because all belief systems attempt to answer three important questions about life. Firstly, what was here before? Secondly, why are we here? And thirdly, what happens when we die? If we can prove that there's a unique subjective value in this way for people to be able to access meaning, we think that we're going to take this debate. Why do we think that's the case? Firstly, let's talk about individuals, how they can access meaning. I think this argument is true. Firstly, it assists you if you're on a place of hopelessness. We're talking here about the beggar on the street. We're talking here about the guy who's had 4 failed jobs and has little prospects in life. In those instances, there's an incentive for you to keep on living and to keep on enjoying that life because you know there's a potential for reward in the future. In those instances, we tell you it's particularly empowering and beneficial to those individuals to be able to access meaning in this way. But secondly, it isn't even restricted to those individuals. Because what is life? Life, we would say, is a series of experiences whose value returns diminishes over time. Any experience which is eating or engaging with certain people, value returns that diminishes over time because you do it again and again and again. And those arbitrary experiences are only tied together and unified by a common thread. There's one unifying value. There's one benefit you will get no matter who you are if you act in a certain way, and that value will not diminish. And that's the benefit that it provides to people, this conception of the afterlife. Because there's benefit to majority of people and the vulnerable, we tell you it's a unique way and an important way for people to be able to access meaning. But secondly, let's talk about death. We tell you that death is important to, firstly, because the people who are nearing death can be incredibly empowered and assisted through this narrative. Because you take comfort and solace in the last few years of your life, knowing that you are potentially and you will die, but in those instances, you have the potential to live the rest of your years in happiness and in peace. Comparative utility is on our side in terms of how we improve the quality of life for those people who say their side is a point for denying them this. But secondly, let's talk about how it's particularly important coming to terms with death and consolidating that. We tell you this psychologically traumatizing experience to have someone close to you leave this world. In those instances, we would tell you it's a belief in the afterlife that softens that blow to individuals. Because individuals now have the comfort in the fact they will potentially be able to connect and engage with that person again in the future. It's something that's incredibly important for this debate, something that's incredibly important for individuals for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it's crucial in overcoming that trauma and be able to consolidate your life in the future. Perhaps you aren't as psychologically strong to be able to engage with the idea of finiteness. This is beneficial to those people. Secondly, it's crucial in giving the rest of your life purpose, because the rest of your life now isn't dependent on the death of that individual, because you're now focused on your own self-interest and your own engagement and your own betterment within life and not worry about death. In those instances, it's so much better for individuals. It's so much, it's a point that neither is I'm proud of.
8 minutes and 7 seconds.
I would like to thank the first speaker of the opposition for their speech, and would like to invite the second speaker of the opposition to please with their speech.
over people's actions a good or bad thing. We made it very clear in our first speech. It is only when people are uniquely fearful of an eternity of damnation that this coercion is able to happen. It was not enough for them to simply paint us as only saying that religion is bad. We never made that argument. Rather, we said that actually whenever narratives are pushed onto entire groups of people and individuals, that if they do not do X thing, they're going to be eternally punished. That is what creates coercion. Our arguments were unique, they were unengaged. But now let's get into some arguments that we heard coming out of the first opposition speech, responding to what they had to say as well before delivering our third substantive argument that the belief in the afterlife creates emotional trauma. Right now, let's get into some broad ideas that we heard coming out of their first speech. We think on framing, first, it was not enough for the opposition to simply give us examples of religions where they have neutral afterlives. Our second substantive argument on complacency still applies. We think it was a false idea for them to think that that's narrowly trade in some way. But secondly, they still have to engage with our alternative where reward incentives matter, insofar as a response to a lot of our material was that it incentivizes people to do good things. At that point, we think they can see that this is true. But now let's get into engagement with the material we've heard that actually started at minute 5 in their last speech. The first argument they give us is this idea of comfort and hope for individuals. We think I have a few responses here. First off, on the idea of comfort to self and individuals, we think it actually can create a sense of complacency, wherein people are more likely to accept injustice or simply be nice rather than simply to stand up against it. This was the analysis we gave you in our second argument that was completely uncontended. But secondly, we would say we're going to get into more stuff that happens on the individual level in our third argument, but how it actually does the exact opposite. But the next argument they give us is about comfort for losing a loved one. We still have a few responses. First off, we think that this isn't the exclusive way to get comfort. Rather, we reject the assumption that individuals that don't prescribe to religions that believe in the afterlife are any less capable of coping with the loss of a loved one or any less capable of making these kinds of rational decisions. Rather, there are other ways to gain comfort in a more healthy way. What does this look like? It looks like me choosing to live my life in the best way possible because those individuals who have passed on cannot. For instance, if my mother's #1 value is to always be honest, to find comfort, I think I wouldn't believe she's just living again in a different sphere. Rather, I would pursue more comfort in being able to carry on that individual loved one's actual legacy. We think their alternatives exist. But now, the majority of their last speech was simply responding to our material. Their main response was that salvation incentivizes good behavior. We have a few responses. First off, we think ulterior motives can exist to motivate people to do good things. Note that the point of information they asked in our first speech, it actually concedes that this is true wherever they say consequences in life through religious values then mean that the impact of deterring negative behavior is not unique. Secondly, we can say people can still prescribe to beliefs or movements of nonviolence or altruism without a belief in the afterlife. Third, people can intrinsically choose to be kind or charitable, which happens in many cases. And fourth, laws or legal consequences can discourage evil actions. These are 4 alternatives that accomplish their same end without any of the harms that we give you that happen uniquely because of the afterlife. Because we tell you, it is very true that the idea that in eternity you're going to be punished is the very reason why coercion is able to happen. But now the second response we would have here is we would say, the belief in the afterlife actually creates unique harms that we brought to you already. Why are these more likely in a world without a belief in the afterlife? The often polar nature of the afterlife, which they concede is true in many cases as having a positive or negative consequence, creates inconsistency in things like good behavior. Because if my incentive is only the afterlife, we think individuals are only going to do so much and then they're going to stop doing these actions. That's why the alternatives we give you are preferable. But fourth, a belief in the afterlife creates more coercion over individuals who believe themselves in the idea of the afterlife. Why is this the case? Because even if we granted them the idea that yes, individuals do want to be more benevolent, we think that if they believe that it's really important to achieve a certain afterlife, they're going to want to influence those around them. Oftentimes, this is the reason why in Christianity, for example, people believe that an individual being homosexual means they're going to go to hell. That means at that point, the belief in the afterlife in and of itself incentivizes more coercion within religious institutions only because of this idea that if they do not change, it's going to lead to things that are actually going to punish them eternally. At that point, we think we are really the only side that has given you a lot of concrete analysis as to why this is the case, as to how a belief in the afterlife incentivizes more coercive mechanisms, actually harms individuals that are involved, not the other way around. But now, before I go into our third substantive argument, I'll take a point if you have one.
we already clarified to you that the afterlife exists on a much broader spectrum than just the polar afterlife, and we have to meaningfully engage that and not pretend that African religions don't exist.
No, what we told you is that first off, we think that yes, that is the case, but even in those cases, the argument that we give you in our second substantive still applies, that they completely dropped. But moreover, what we would say is that even on their highest ground, any idea of the afterlife is almost always contingent on what an individual's actions are. That means that coercion still will take place in any capacity. But now let's get into our third substantive argument, which directly clashes with what they gave you in your first speech, which is really its argument about comfort and hope. The belief in the afterlife creates emotional trauma. We have 2 points under this. The first is that the belief in the afterlife creates fear for yourself. Let's analyze precisely what is at stake when individuals believe in the afterlife. In the vast majority of religions, the distinction between entering an afterlife is generally dependent on what an individual does. And oftentimes we think that this disparages yourself because nothing you ever do will be enough to achieve some kind of afterlife in some cases of different religions. For example, I think that in some sects of religions, things like adultery, alcoholism, or premarital sex, drug use, or even not being baptized means that an individual is condemned to one certain outcome whenever they do die. Whenever you fear the afterlife in some way, that emotion of being terrified of the religious ramifications that follow certain beliefs overpower messages of hope and comfort. This clashes with their case because the intense personal pressure that accompanies a belief in the afterlife causes trauma, anxiety, and in some cases depression, and people are doubting whether or not they will be guaranteed any kind of positive position in that afterlife. The impact is compounded by the ability for fear to be manipulated, but even if that does not result independently, if they think it's important to consider individuals, we think on that point alone it's a reason to propose. But the second point we have during this argument is that we would say it actually leads to more trauma on behalf of others not being able to enter the afterlife. Imagine the emotional trauma that accompanies the loss of a loved one. If you believe in the afterlife and you fear that a loved one that's suffering is going to actually be suffering eternally because they did not subscribe to your same beliefs or ideologies, that anxiety is intensified massively. The individual now lives with the belief that their loved one will be suffering forever. We think if the opposition claims that beliefs in the afterlife are a vessel to hope and peace for loved ones, it is an equal mechanism that then actually leads to more fear and despair on behalf of individuals that they believe do not subscribe to these same ideologies. At the end of the day, we think that at their highest point in ground is this idea that we can incentivize individuals to do good things. They do not uniquely tell you why it's so necessary to have this belief in the afterlife. At best, all of the options they give us is simply mitigatory. We tell you the idea that having the afterlife in and of itself creates unique harms of coercion and unique harms to individuals. That is why we are so proud to propose.
8 minutes and 1 second. Would you mind just pushing away?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Friends for marshmallows or something. I would like to thank the second speaker of the opposition for their speech, and would like to invite the second speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
unionists, when we contextualize and tell you that religions exist beyond Islam and Christianity, is that their case exists not in the majority of religions, right? We told you that a lot of them have a lot more abstractness in terms of what the afterlife is, but that the belief in the afterlife isn't even inherent to religion. There are people who believe that when they die, they can become stars, and that they'll look down on their loved ones forever. There are people who believe that they get absorbed into the universe. There are people who believe that there's some kind of afterlife, but that is not tied to religion. But then we told you, even those who do believe in some kind of religious afterlife, that it's not even heaven and hell all of them. That Buddhist monks believe that they'll either be enlightened or reincarnated. Some people believe that they're going to get another shot to live life, told what they've done wrong, and then they can come back and get another chance to fix what they did, right? What they refuse to engage is something that is just not the extreme. All they tell you about is that people are told that they're going to go to hell all the time, and that's going to be extremely coercive, right? But the strategic error is that they then tell you that we are okay with religion, at no point making any active delineation from that. What I'm going to be handling in my speech is why we think that this provides an active incentive for morality, and why that morality is essential to the fabric of society. But before that, there needs to be a lot clearer, because they just try to dump on everything on us, right? Let's sift through this as clearly as possible. There are two main lines in their argument. One, that people are coerced and punished by this, and secondly, that people who are oppressed become complacent and by extension don't fight their own oppression. At no point is this ever made inherent to the belief in the afterlife, right? All they ever try and tell you is that, hey, maybe it might be accentuated. But this is the importance of them having to prove the inherency, because if it can exist without that, at what point do you remove people's reason to live on the basis of something that's gonna persist beyond that, right? But like, on what basis are they going to take away something that's so important to humanity for a harm that's not even going to disappear after that happens, right? We told you that this debate is specifically about not about organized religion. What does this mean? Because what Ricky specifically tells you that we're not defending organized religion. What we are defending is the ability for people to believe in something beyond that. The ability for something to believe in something that they determine and something that they believe is then valuable. This means that arguments like how the LGBTQ minority is persecuted do not factor into this debate. No one is telling you that Christians are legitimate for oppressing people, but we're telling you that we think people ought to be allowed to believe in the afterlife. It means that arguments like how people get entirely complacent, aside from being really untrue, right? It's still something that we don't think is actually valuable in this debate. We said to support the subjectivity, and that's what they have to engage, right? What does that mean for this debate, right? Another thing to know is that also a lot of them harms are inherent to the abuse of religion, not even religion itself, right? So people like tying keys around their kids' neck and telling them to bomb themselves or something, we probably concede isn't okay, but those religions themselves also say is not okay, right? Not only are their harms not inherent to the afterlife, they're not even inherent to the very religion they ended up talking about. It's all inherent to the worst case scenario and the absolute abuse of that power. Now let's talk about what that means for this debate. When we talk about the argument of coercion, it can only be in terms of what the concept of the afterlife does, right? And the important thing that they miss out on here is that it only ever has power over you when you believe in it, right? If you don't believe in the concept of the afterlife, it cannot literally have power over you. No one is ever proven it to be empirically true. This means that when they start telling you about how people are perpetually oppressed, it's a lie. We think that people find value in those actions. People find value in time. People find value in the things that they do in a church, right? But not only because they're told that's going to help them in the afterlife. People are told to time because they're going to get rich in that 5 years. Because God is going to reward them in this life too. That was the importance of them having to do some kind of inheritance. That even those kinds of abuses they tell you about are likely to persist. If anything, it gets significantly worse on their side. So they're like, type now, you don't have a chance later because you only have one life. You will never be rewarded in the afterlife. Right? It's significantly worse on their side, even if you buy that. The next thing they tell you is about complacency. This is also like really a lie, right? Because people believing in the afterlife doesn't mean they don't believe that they shouldn't be oppressed now, right? We don't think that that's true. You can see this in how during slavery in America, a lot of slaves were extremely religious. They believed in Christianity, but that did not stop them from fighting for liberation. It didn't stop them from overturning the system of slavery, even though most of them bought into Christianity, which is typically a very peaceful religion, right? We don't think that's a real characterization to be made. But even if it was true, we think that this is often because of extenuating circumstances. Think that people can't control. You can't control poverty. You can't control how white people are going to treat you when they get to your show. It gives you some kind of value to derive through suffering. That even when you can't uplift yourself, even when you can't change what's happening, you are still able to derive value from it, because even though this life sucks for you, you will wear a white gown and we all do the pearly gates. That is the truth that we are talking about. that it's not going to make people complacent, but even if it did, it still gives them something better to believe in, as opposed to them having to live with the absolute squander of their lives never amounting to anything, and them never being able to change that after they die, right? But what did we give you, and why we failed to engage that? Because we characterize that this debate was specifically about the individual, that beliefs what's to serve the interests of an individual, and the point at which those beliefs are harmful to them themselves, it is then when we think we prefer a world in their absence, right? What did we tell? Two to three things in terms of how people live, right? That they can find value, the suffering that they face when they're living, the suffering that they can face when they're close to death in a minute, and the suffering that they face when they lose loved ones. They only ever engage this loss vessel by telling you that anxiety is so much worse because you think that person has gone to hell, right? No, that's not true. We think that like there's never been a funeral where someone's like, we're really sad, he's going to hell. That's not true, right? What often happens is that people believe that you're going to get into a better afterlife, right? Regardless of who you are, who believe in the mercy of deities even. But beyond that, we think that people often believe similar and congruent things. It's not like it's not like the majority of instances where you believe a child is an absolutism. But even if it was, we think that that's something that's fine. It allows people to interact with their religion. It allows them to continue to find something that is better for them, because it tells them that even though you are suffering now, this is also the place you can find solace. It gives them the place to run, even in the instance in which they are harmed. Before I get into my actual extension,
Are people who don't believe in the afterlife less fulfilled and super depressed compared to
they're
those
not, right? People can
who do
find
believe in the
value.
afterlife?
People can find value outside of the afterlife, but that doesn't mean everyone should be forced to, right? Different people engage with different things in different ways. At no point can you ever say everyone should be an atheist, and on that basis, everyone should live like that, right? It is possible, very possible, and nobody will say it's not, to find value outside religion. It is very possible to find value outside that moral stance. It is very possible to find value outside the afterlife. But that doesn't mean everyone is a nihilist or everyone should be forced to be a nihilist. At the very least, if we have no objective truth, then let people believe what gets closest to their version of truth. So, this is what I'm going to handle in my speech, right? How we need to provide an incentive for morality. And they really made a lot of this analysis for me before, right? That religion can provide an important incentive for people to do that. Important analysis here is that people are often extremely self-interested, right? People often work in their own interests. What a concept of the afterlife does, it finds a way to meld those interests with the interests of other people and get people to work towards a common societal good. It gets people to be more peaceful. It gets people to not hold grudges. It gets people to not fight each other, right? It emphasizes peace, but specifically that afterlife is able to do that because it tells them that this peace that they're having now can carry on into the next life. And it's not just them giving up for now, right? It provides them with an incentive for them not to be absolute squander in the instance in which they've been hurt, that essentially allows societies to be able to move forward together. What you're going to do right after my speech is that we think that one, the hearts we're talking about are not those of organized religion. We have to talk specifically about belief in the afterlife, but moreover, that belief provides comfort to those who will not be able to find it otherwise, but moreover, it provides an incentive for morality to those who will not have it otherwise. On that basis, side help.
8 minutes and 13 seconds.
We'd just like to remind the audience that while it's great to both interact in your debate, especially while laughing and things like that, keep it to a minimum just because the room is very loud, and especially signaling is not gay, it's strictly not allowed. So, thank you.
I would like to thank the second speaker of the opposition for their speech, and would like to invite the third speaker of the proposition to deliver their speech.
If you take a step back and look at what the opposition's case actually was, you'll realize that it's incredibly theoretical. Let me break it down. They said first, the afterlife lets you access the meaning of life. It lets you come to terms with losses. It instills you with this idea of altruism and morality. We don't think that the very theoretical impacts that we bring to you as a result of the afterlife are A, unique, or B, enough of a consideration to determine how to evaluate the round. In this speech, I'll be explaining not only why the practical effects of having a belief in the afterlife outweigh any theoretical arguments they bring to the table, but I'll also explain why we went on their ground as well. In this speech, a couple of things. First, I'll be going over a very important clarification that needs to be made at this point in the debate. Second, I'll attack the third substantive argument independently before positing the two nexus questions you ask yourself in the round. The first is about how does the afterlife affect human emotion, and the second, how does the belief in the afterlife affect human action? We identify emotions and actions as the two ideas of clash that both sides seem to care most about. But before I get into that, let's make a very important clarification. We want to make crystal clear what the afterlife actually looks like. We think it's uniquely coercive and is distinct from the rest of maybe other tenets that exist in certain religions. And why is this the case? First of all, we told you that they have very internal, everlasting impacts. That makes it uniquely coercive. Even if you buy the majority of their responses, that, well, nothing about the afterlife or this belief in the afterlife is unique and other things can simply result in coercion, we think the uniqueness of why the afterlife is so problematic is because the uniqueness of the afterlife's impact on human decision-making, because it's so eternal. But second of all, we told you that the belief in the afterlife has a very real impact, and it's not just like an idea, for example, how someone might remember you. But the third of all thing that we would say is that in the vast majority of cases, we think that the afterlife results in either a positive or negative conception of what the afterlife looks like. Their only response is, well, there are other African tribes that have different afterlife beliefs, like trying to communicate with your ancestors. We think that the vast majority of cases in the world's largest religions, namely Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, all of those have a belief in the afterlife that does have that positive-negative dichotomy, meaning that in a world where we prioritize the scale of the impact of the vast majority of belief systems for the afterlife being positive and being negative, that's what's uniquely coercive. It wasn't enough for them to simply say, well, there are other religions that don't have the same conception of the afterlife. Going into their first substantive argument, they basically tell you that religion incentivizes altruism. But remember, Emily gave you 4 ulterior mechanisms for achieving this very end of altruism that went completely unengaged with by the second opposition speaker. What we told you is that essentially they operate without the negative harms of coercion, the negative harms of the belief in the afterlife. We told you, first of all, we think that humans have an inherent value to try and prioritize the right thing. You don't need the afterlife to try and get people to do the right thing. I think it's very offensive for them to essentially argue that the only way, the best way to incentivize people to do good deeds is for there to be an afterlife. For example, I am not the most devout Hinduism in the world, but that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person or I'm incapable of doing good deeds. But second of all, we told you that if anything, we think that people are non-violent, there are laws that exist, and individuals can simply choose to be kind. The unique harm of the belief in the afterlife is how some religious institutions choose to spin it and create that coercion mechanism, as I'll elaborate in the 2 class points that I surround. Before I get into them, I'll take it.
Why does that coercion mechanism not exist when you are told that you have to abuse only the slide that you have no other chances?
Because we think that the uniqueness of the coercion argument stems from the uniqueness of the impact of the scale of the belief in the afterlife. We told you that the belief in the afterlife is unique because it has an eternal impact. None of their arguments talk about this uniqueness. That's what makes the belief in the afterlife inherently coercive. I'll elaborate on that in the first class point, which is, how does the belief in the afterlife affect human emotion? They give you one argument about this, basically saying, well, it gives people hope that their relatives have another chance. However, what we think is that they fail to engage completely with our third substantive argument, aside from a little quip, as to how specifically the belief in the afterlife increases people's fear for their loved ones. Why is this the case? If they want to argue that the belief in the afterlife makes people comfortable in the belief and knowledge that their relatives might be in a better place, that operates both ways, in the sense that if their relatives did commit egregious sins and did do bad actions, that inherently necessarily means that they're very fearful for the afterlife that they would be living, which, as we already established in the vast majority of cases, is a positive-negative dichotomy. Then secondly, what we told you is on our side of the house, there are 2 emotions that are uniquely created when you have a belief in the afterlife. Fear and shame. I'll get into both of those right now. On the idea of fear, that was our third substantive argument that got very little engagement with. We told you that this fear operates at an individual and a societal level when people fear for the well-being of their loved ones after they pass into the afterlife. We told you that this fear and despair for other people who are related to you is unique to the afterlife, again, because it has eternal impacts. If someone is damned for eternity, yeah, that's going to make me fearful of their ability to have a better life in the afterlife. But the second thing about emotions that we talked to you about was this idea of shame that got very little engagement with, except for the idea that, well, oh, you can just simply uninvolve yourself from religion or choose to marry someone of your sexual orientation, even if this coercion might exist. We think that was an insufficient response to our material because they didn't engage with the structural mechanisms as to why this belief in the afterlife is uniquely coercive. They simply say people can absolve themselves and distance themselves from religion, but they themselves argue that religion is inherently influential. So, if that is so true, that means that given religion's influence, it is going to be incredibly coercive, and that harms people's identities, or if they are refusing to change, shames them for having those identities. Believing that if people don't change, then that means that their belief in the afterlife is essentially very harmful because it damages their conception of what they believe their identity to be. Why is this a problem? Because in a world where they aren't able to actualize their own benefits, or prioritize their own identity over others, that means that their meaning of life that they talk about is definitely harmed. But the second question is how does the belief in the afterlife affect human action? They tell you one big idea, which is that, well, a belief in the afterlife increases remembrance and makes it more likely that people will remember their ancestors for good deeds. What was our comparable material? We told you in our first substantive argument that people are coerced into doing actions they wouldn't otherwise do. Now, their biggest response was, well, that isn't very unique. That coercion exists with other tenets of religion as well. I already addressed that. But then they told you that, well, the belief in the afterlife essentially doesn't necessarily mean that individuals will have to be coerced, but we gave you the structural incentives that religious institutions often have in order to coerce people into doing these things. First, they prioritize getting money, as Ella told you in her speech, but more importantly, they're trying to get people to conform to their religious ideals. Why is this the case? Because a lot of these religions know that if they don't have people who follow their same ideals, their religion is virtually meaningless. So at the point where they need to have a stable following of people who conform to their ideals, that's what's going to get them to be coercive, and that's what's going to incentivize them to try and change people and reject them for who they believe themselves to be. They want to talk about the meaning of life. We think the meaning of individual's life should be left up to the individual, not to a religious institution that is going to try and coerce them into believing otherwise. We think that at the point where our side of the house uniquely tells you why you're more likely to have better, rational individuals who are able to protect their own identities and live without a fear of coercion, without a belief in the afterlife, that is why we are so far ahead in this debate. To conclude, the comparative in this debate was not about whether or not religion was good or bad. It was about the uniqueness of the afterlife being tagged along to that religion in and of itself and how that impacts people. It wasn't enough for them to say that we essentially crossed the house by defending religion. They needed to explain why the uniqueness of us rejecting the afterlife is so problematic. They haven't done that. They lost the round.
8 minutes and 4 seconds.
I would like to thank the third speaker of the proposition for their speech and would like to invite the third speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
This shouldn't be a debate about whether religion is always good. This
shouldn't be about a debate about whether religion can be toxic or coercive, because this is a debate about the individual. This is a debate about how individuals and people themselves can find meaning and way up an understanding of what life after can look like. It's about individuals using that and feeling safety and feeling comfort in their immediate circumstances because they know there is something after, they know there is more. This debate falls into three clashes. Firstly, the belief in the afterlife and whether that forces violence within our society is something they notably drop in their native speeches. Secondly, about the internalization of these views and what it means for families but also minorities. And thirdly, about whether this can be a coercive force, specifically because of a belief in the afterlife. But before that, let's talk about two strategic errors that are going to lose USA in this debate before I even get into my rebuttal. Because we had to tell you from the beginning, from speech 1 to speech 2, and has still no engagement, is that we don't have to support organized religion in its current form and organized religion in how it exists now. In telling people homosexuality is a sin, in telling people what is a right thing, and telling people what is good, what is bad. What we had to support was that individuals should be able to make a way up, individuals should be able to believe in the afterlife, and we prefer a world where individuals believe in that. Divorced from an organized religion, telling them misapplying that belief, and telling people how to believe in that. Importantly, it takes out most of their case and everything about when they talk to you about coercion and the harms to minorities. Strategically, they've already been pushed out of this debate panel. You cannot award it to them. But secondly, the spectrum of religions have been absolutely under-analyzed. Because all they want to tell you is it's good, it's bad. And that's true maybe for Hinduism and like Christian Americans. Because they fail to engage with the unique spectrum of the 2/3 of the world, the African traditional religions, Judaism and Buddhism, that believe in reincarnation and another neutral life after death, that don't necessarily believe in that good versus bad dichotomy. Their case does absolutely nothing when that coercion doesn't exist. Their case does absolutely nothing when they cannot engage with what it looks like just for a positive outcome, one devoid of punishment. Knowing that we still will win and we still are going to take this debate on the basis of even a good versus bad, a good reward or a punishment of it. Knowing that, let's move into the first clash about violence and that can be forced through religion. Firstly, they talk about like terrorism, killing foreigners and killing people of other religions that are religions tell you to. Firstly, again, this is not inherent to a belief in the afterlife. This is inherent to religions telling you what to do because there will be a benefit even in your immediate life, and it's the right thing to do if you find meaning in that religion and you want to. So that's still going to exist if they think religion exists on their world and organized religion, that people will do it for an immediate benefit in the only life they have. They will do it for an immediate benefit because they know they have no other, that violence still exists. But secondly, with like a martyrdom and terrorists that end their own lives to kill others because they find it valuable. Okay, no progression or interaction literally after the first speech about this. When you tell you like these are irrational people who are brainwashed, who do not think rationally, that like honestly trying to that they would do it anyway, to be remembered for their own religion because they love their God, because that's about their conceptions. People are not rational mindsets. We cannot think just because they did not believe in an afterlife, they will not feel as mandated by their own religion, they will not feel as mandated for the other people around them because they think that like Westernism is a sin. Notice that violence then is taken out of this debate and it's just about an individual way up and an individual choice. So now onto the internalization of toxic views. First they talk about minorities. What do they say? That they will be told to accept a position of vulnerability within the society, and that they will feel worthless and feel terrified because of the afterlife. Three responses to this. That firstly, that religion can be used in that organized system in many different ways, not just to oppress people. Because under the same system that told like slaves to be subjugated because of religion, religious theology rose, like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King in America, because it said that the existing structures of society were sinful, were wrong, and weren't for religion. Let's fight for a spot in heaven, let's fight for a spot in your afterlife, because the existing things go against religion. Religion can be used in a multitude of ways, not just to oppress people, but to lift them up. Latin America, apartheid South Africa, USA, Jim Crow laws. Religion isn't inherently bad, a belief in the afterlife isn't inherently bad, it's only how people interpret. Secondly, still no argument and engagement of what it means for an opt-out in that religion. That if you actively feel it's so toxic, if you actively feel that that belief in the afterlife scares you so much, you can move out of it. That's why the people more today and more people who don't feel accepted by the religion are getting pushed away by it. If they see that the religion actively contradicts their identity and that immediate toxic fear makes them feel unsafe in their own space, that's why more people are becoming atheists. That if you can find value in that, you should be able to. But the people who can't and the people who make that way, that they'd still rather feel that fear of an afterlife and uncertainty because the knowing that their family members will be okay afterwards, the knowing that that's still a better possibility for them, that's something an individual should do, that's something that's so meaningful to the majority of society. Before I go into the second day, I'll take this pure one.
Should the way that people interpret the afterlife play a part in this debate?
Yes, because it's an individual's way up and a belief in the afterlife. We think individuals should be able to interpret it how they want. We prefer a world where individuals made their own conception of the afterlife and prefer a world in which individuals believe in that. Because let's talk about comfort and values and comfort in an afterlife. What's most important in this debate and what it revolves around. Because notably, they give very little analysis on how you can find it outside of religion. That some people can, but a majority can't. Just like passing on your legacy and your own values does nothing for a mother whose child has just passed away at a young age and can find nothing in it. That knowing that comfort that they somewhere better, knowing that comfort that they're not suffering, and knowing that comfort that there's something better can be so meaningful to a family. Because when they talk about families that are disjuncted because of religion, and that fear inside that your grandmother might not go to hell again because she has a different religion is a minority of circumstances. Because they themselves do not understand that most people and most families are similar religions, are the same religions, and that is a minority of circumstances. Because most people who do average lives, good lives, do not fear they're going to hell, and know that they have done enough, and know they are good enough to go eventually to heaven, that they know there's sometimes mercy, that we still rely on the majority of circumstances where millions of families around the world, because they are the same religion, know their grandmother is in a better place, and know that for the individuals who have a tough life and are never going to break out of that system, it is valuable to them, that comfort, to know there's something afterwards. The millions and the hundreds of millions around the world who find comfort, who find peace, and who would otherwise be terrified because they themselves are now because they have insurance of the afterlife. Thirdly, about an active incentive to do charity. And they implicitly concede that a religion puts a higher obligation on you to do good in a society when they say like you'll never feel enough, that you never feel like you've done enough to get into heaven. They themselves concede people do more good for society, donate more charity, treat others better, and treat others well within that society, a net good to the entire world. But lastly, about coercion. And they think that these people themselves still haven't USA hasn't analyzed why it is coercive or uniquely harmful. That if you don't want to buy into Christianity, a belief in afterlife won't make you listen to the Jehovah's Witnesses at your door today. That people will still do that regardless of a belief in the afterlife, because in Christianity it literally says Jesus wants you to proselytize and spread religion. It isn't a uniquely coercive method. It's about an individual panel. Do not let them trick you. It's about how they make up that religion, how they understand the religion. I am so proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the third speaker of the opposition for their speech, and would like to invite the reply speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
It becomes evident at the beginning of Prop 3 that USA seems to want to insult everyone who isn't Christian or Islam by saying that any value they can derive from believing in the afterlife is purely theoretical and by extension can't mean much in their own life. We think think that that is an insult. That is not fair to people who believe that their fathers have now become stars and now look down on them. It's not fair to people who believe in alternate conceptions of the afterlife. It's not fair to people who aren't part of those two religions, the only two they choose to engage, right? We think that that's not in this debate. Let's do some framing here, because what did we tell you was the core of this debate? We told you that the core of this debate was about the individual who buys into that and what is going to be best for them. That is why we spent the entirety of the first week telling you about people who are living through suffering, people who are on the brink of death and comfort for those who have died, how it impacts the individual who buys into that belief, right? Note, this is important, because it means even if they win everything they've been telling you, it was one, not the core of that debate, right? Even if they win it, they're still winning a secondary class. What you ought to value in this debate is how it's going to impact the very person who believes in it and by extension who can win on that clash. What did we give you under that first clash? We told you that people are able to find solace in living through suffering. People are able to find solace when they are close to death. People are able to find solace for those whom they have lost, right? At no point do they meaningfully engage in this. There's no rebuttal. The only thing we actually get is the idea that it gets a lot worse when you believe that someone in your family was a heathen and by extension is going to burn in hell. What responses did we give? We told you that that's one, not a majority of instances, right? We did hear analysis on this early on. But moreover, we told you that even if it did that, people are still able to turn to those same beliefs and find comfort. They are able to find comfort in those things, right? We think that even in the instances in which that harm is possible, it is still something that can be fixed. Beyond that, what they give you is first this idea on coercion, right? Because the only meaningful analysis that can factor into this debate was how impactful the idea of the afterlife is. What did we tell you? We've already told you that they're framing it to be seriously extreme, right? People often believe that if they don't buy what a religion says, they can buy out of that religion. That is why there's a growing trend of atheism, right? But moreover, we told you that it only has power over when you buy it. That means that all their harms about people forced to give up things can't stand. It is meaningful choices that people are making, choices with which they themselves can derive value. They can't just say that liberty can only exist in their conception of what freedom is, right? But moreover, we told you that it's not inherently bad. That even if it was that powerful, that can be used to better shape society, right? Because importantly, they only ever engage what that power means when it's being misused. They only ever engage what it means to have a very strong conception of the afterlife when someone is using it to make you a suicide bomber, when someone is using it to make you feel bad as a human being. They never engage it outside of that context, right? What we told you about that context was that their harms will persist beyond that because they themselves concede that the belief in the afterlife is only an intensifier and is not the core of the very problem. This is impactful because it means that the very thing that they set out to solve from their very first speech is not solved by the preference of a world without a belief in the afterlife, right? And then the second thing that they tell you about is complacency. We already told you how we think religion doesn't inherently make people complacent. People are still able to fight for better, but even if they are that they actually fail at that pursuit, when they become complacent, they can still believe in something that's going to make them feel a lot better about their lives, right? What are you deriving from this task? We think that one, the core of this debate, which was the individual is still falling on side opposition in terms of the value, which is not theoretical, that they can derive from that religion. But moreover, we told you something that element of coercion, if not existing to the degree that they want, can still be used for good and does not exist in their bad vacuum. But third, we told you that people are still able to pick up arms and fight, right? Even if they fully win what they've given you on their side, they want a secondary clash, they can't eradicate their own harms. We told you that they get so much worse because all the consequences of that are packed into your finite existence and all the consequences are packed into your life. If you stand with people being able to derive meaningful value, knowing that that is the way they can derive value, you're standing with opposition.
4 minutes and 12 seconds.
I would like to thank the retired speaker of the opposition speech. I would like to invite the retired speaker of the opposition to deliver their speech.
We asked the third opposition speaker, a POI, does how people interpret the afterlife matter in today's round? And they said yes. This was a very important concession, because it wasn't enough for them to pretend that they live in a world without organized religion, without some certain biases in these religions and problematic power structures that mean that these religions have every incentive to coerce people into doing different things. Their reply speaker said something really interesting. They said that the existence of the afterlife is essentially an intensifier of existing coercion. That is precisely what we are saying on our side of the house. In a world where organized religion exists, in a world where people are likely to impose their view of the afterlife on others, in a world where people do often have positive and negative conceptions of the afterlife, the existence of the afterlife uniquely magnifies certain tendencies towards coercion that people have, uniquely magnifies and solidifies problematic conceptions of identity that certain religions have. It wasn't enough for them to ignore that this was the case. Because of this, they lose the round. Their mitigatory responses to our material and rather not fleshed out analysis on their side was not enough. Two questions in this speech. First, is the afterlife in fact uniquely coercive? And second, how does it impact human fulfillment? But first, is the afterlife uniquely coercive? Note that their very third argument basically said this: because there are positive and negative conceptions of the afterlife that incentivizes people to do good things, to engage in altruism, which acknowledge that positive and negative conceptions of the afterlife, which are bought into by literally billions of people in the world who subscribe to religions like Christianity and Islam, are in fact a part of this debate. Why did we tell you that that was so uniquely coercive? Well, we told you that this essentially solidifies problematic conceptions of identity. We acknowledge that problematic conceptions of individuals, like LGBTQ individuals, exist on either side of the house. What we then told you from first proposition is that the idea that in the afterlife you can be eternally and extremely punished for these ideologies solidifies the conception that these identities are in fact so problematic. It is uniquely the afterlife that intensifies the impacts of this coercion. And no, when people have literally bought into a faith that forms the core of their identity, sometimes they can't choose to just leave the church that they and their entire family are born into. They can't just decide to turn away conversion therapy when they've internalized the fact that they're so not deserving of a future of happiness that they should be damned to hell. We also told you that often this leads people to harm themselves. Look, the only reason often that people are willing to engage in acts of martyrdom or to go into crusades and lose their life is because they are promised a new one. That is a unique impact to the conception of the afterlife, and one that organized religions, to the extent that they exist, which we think that they do, are going to use in order to incentivize people to do things. But even outside of positive and negative conceptions of religion, we still think that the afterlife is incredibly problematic. Even in neutral religions, it does create a sense of complacency when you think, well, I don't necessarily have to improve my own life because I'm going to be promised a next one. Their only responses to this were that, well, sometimes people do engage in acts of revolution. Yeah, we don't think that this completely goes away, but it definitely enhances the complacency of individuals. That is something they did not engage with. But second, how does this impact people's fulfillment? Their arguments were basically, people have hope, and then hope for their relatives in the afterlife. We told you, unengaged with, that this is also possible on our side of the house in a world without this. And frankly, we told you that it is likely to also exacerbate these kinds of feelings of hopelessness. All they told you was that, well, no one has ever gone to a funeral and said, oh, this person is going to hell, that's so sad. And they told you that this was the minority of cases. We don't think that that was enough engagement on this point. There are plenty of Christian parents with gay children who literally fear for their children's eternal damnation. To the extent that this creates some hope, it creates equal measure of trauma and hopelessness. In addition to all the negative impacts of coercion we tell you about on our side of the house. Their material was insufficient. The responses to ours were too. We win this debate.